Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin in just a minute. Hello and welcome. We are just waiting for a few more attendees to join, and the webinar will begin shortly. Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. Before we begin, our NAIOP Vancouver President, Anthony Ewan, will say a few words.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar for May, and many thanks again to Brian, Jennifer, and Werner for joining us. It should be a great discussion on commercial real estate trends across Canada. And as in the past, we'll be recording this webinar, which will be available on our NAIOP Vancouver website. And so before I turn things over to Jennifer and the panel today, I'd like to give you a brief update on activities NAIOP Vancouver has been doing. It's no doubt been an unusual and challenging year, but the board remains dedicated to providing sponsor value while also serving as an important voice for our industry. So on the advocacy front, we've been active on an economic restart plan for downtown Vancouver, working with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Downtown BIA, and other associations focusing on the reopening of our downtown post-COVID. We've also been active on a number of policy areas, including having close communications with the City of Vancouver on their proposed DCC and CSC updates, as well as improvements to the permitting process. And early this month, we also hosted our sponsor-only roundtable discussion with the City of Delta. The planning staff at Delta provided a great update, and I thought the discussion was collaborative and really reflects the importance of these ongoing public-private conversations. Our annual cost of business survey, this year focusing on industrial, is in the field with regional municipalities, and we look forward to sharing the results with you in the fall. And as for upcoming events, we continue to navigate the current COVID environment and current COVID restrictions, but aim to maintain our current webinar series with additional networking events, including our annual popular golf tournament. And as always, we owe a big thank you to our sponsors who make our work possible. Our featured sponsors for today's event are at the Platinum level, at the Properties Group, BD, Boza Properties, CBRE, Colliers International, Cushman & Wakefield, Grosvenor, GWO Realty Advisors, Hungerford Properties, Manulife Investment Management, Oxford Properties, Quadreal Property Group, Strand Project Managers, and Westgroup Properties. And at the gold level, we have CoStar Group, Low Tide Properties, Nicola Wealth Real Estate, and Peterson Group. And at the patron level, we have Clark Wilson, Devancore, Dialogue Design, KPMG, Morguard, and Wills McClellan Construction. And so with that, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Jennifer Palmer-Russell, who is the Senior Vice President with Rennie on the advisory group. So Jennifer, thank you again. Take it away and have a great day, everybody.
Very much. Welcome to today's discussion. Today's discussion was initially conceived as a national perspective for the Vancouver market, but we thought that we would be crazy not to take advantage of our two speakers, in Werner and Brian, and focus it as a national overview of just what we're seeing across the country and in the different markets. So with that, I'm really pleased to introduce you Werner Dietl, who's CBRE's president and CEO. Werner's been with CB Richard Ellis for 26 years, serving for the last couple of years as their president and CEO. And Brian Rosen, who's the president and CEO of Colliers International for the Canadian market. Brian assumed the role in March of 2020 and is responsible for driving and establishing the strategic direction for Colliers in Canada. So welcome to both of you. You do have quite a few things in common, as we've learned over our first couple of discussions. You certainly picked your suits properly so that you could match and complement one another. You both play tennis, as I just learned before we started, but you're also relatively new to your current roles and assumed those within a year and then encountering a significant amount of change. So for today's discussion, we are going to start in talking about the markets a bit more, and then we're going to transition to the discussion to pick your brains and gain some insights as to what you're seeing as business leaders of two of these arguably largest employers of our sector in Canada. When we started preparing for this discussion, we chose to focus a lot more of the discussion on moving forward and the things that we're seeing coming out of the first half of 2021 and what we expect in terms of recovery and growth as we move forward. So we're going to explore a bit of the legacy of this period, but focus on what it means for us in the future. Arguably, 2020 could be characterized the most by a suppression type environment as well as recalibration. And 2021 is certainly showing signs of more redefinition, acceleration, and expansion. There's a lot of reasons for us to be quite positive and optimistic moving forward, whether it's the low interest rate environment and the Bank of Canada's commitment to try and keep those rates at 0.25% for the rest of this year. The increased savings that we've seen in Canadian bank accounts, now sitting at $80 to $90 billion in savings. The strengthening of the labor market, certainly not back to pre-pandemic levels, but certainly stronger labor markets and having more Canadians employed now than we did going into the pandemic. And an anticipation of renewed immigration. While we did see immigration certainly pull back over the last year and a half, the federal government has renewed its commitments of trying to get to that 400,000, starting certainly by 2022 and continuing for the next couple of years, which will certainly benefit the major markets of Montreal, Toronto, as well as Vancouver. So I thought that we would start the discussion in that theme of recalibration and some of the recalibration that we have seen arguably on each of these markets, but what does some of that recalibration, whether it's in retail or tourism or hospitality or otherwise, or even the office markets, where do you see some of the acceleration coming out of that recalibration in the next couple of years and certainly in the next 6 months? Brian or Werner, I'll allow each of you to decide who gets to go first on that one.
I'll lob it to Brian because we're tennis players. So here you go.
There you go. There you go. Start with the puns to begin with. No, thank you. First of all, Jen, thank you to NAIOP and Werner. I think it's going to be a fun discussion here today. As you said, I mean, the recalibration, the big thing that it's really going to be across a lot of the sectors. I mean, it's easy to look at it and say, well, industrial, it's chugging along, it's doing really well, and it's going to continue. But if you think about the interconnection between how all these things are working now, how interrelated industrial is to retail, supply chain, logistics, e-commerce, et cetera, there's a lot of connection there. But if I had to look at one, I am gonna go with the retail transformation. That's something that I'm passionate about. I think it's really where we're going to see change accelerate over the next couple of years, and even how we're talking about retail a lot. It's it's not even considering retail. It's a good plot of land where mixed use stuff can happen. I mean, that's too much of a mouthful, so you got to use retail. But if you start thinking about a lot of these existing retail, from the enclosed malls down to the individual small retail outlets, it's going to change in terms of how it's set up. Whether it's a dramatic change to a more purpose-built type of retail, locations that factor in the fact that people now are shopping in omni-channel. They're shopping in a purely digital storefront, click and collect type of model, or if you have just even the shift in the type of retail sites that are within malls and how a mall is demalled and turned into multifamily, et cetera. So I think on that front, it's not really a hot take. I mean, a lot of people are saying it in the marketplace, so I can't claim to be novel with that, but I really do feel that happens there. And I think we haven't seen that acceleration happen yet, in part because of the hesitance to sell and take some of the write-downs over the last couple of years. But as things start to transform naturally and coming out of the pandemic, we're going to see which service industries and people unfortunately made it or didn't make it through, and that's going to accelerate even further some of the transformation. So I'd start with retail as a big recalibration in terms of how it's set up.
Yeah, let me tack onto that. And good afternoon, everybody at NAIOP. I can't see any of you, or none of us can, but nice to be with you today. I was a big believer and still am a big believer in mixed use. And I think that this, the pandemic is going to accelerate mixed use, to Brian's point. And, retail is going to be a big part of that. And so just how we start to reprogram, areas that have been traditionally, retail with office and resi and other components that as Brian mentioned, click and collect, or it's urban supply chain. I think there's this real mashup that's going to occur, and I do see mixed use accelerating, and I'm excited about that, because I think that actually makes for very good cities and good balance. And I know our friends at Rennie are right in the middle of all that type of change. The other piece that I'm looking at from a transformation, obviously, is really just around office, obviously, and it can be the elephant in the room in a lot of cases, but I do think this is a magical moment that we have to really start to look at how we work and where we drive value from physical offices and how we drive value from virtual experiences. I can tell you, I love the office. I love to collaborate. That's sort of in my nature. And this business of brokerage is really natural for that type of idea exchange. And so I see a big future for office, but I do see us using it in a different way. And I think that's a little bit, that's all of our, I know Brian's organization, ours, and many of our clients are really in this thinking right now. And as we start to look at what's happening in Europe and in Asia and in the US, it's starting to reopen and people are starting to reimagine, but that hasn't occurred yet. So we're right in the middle of this, which is really exciting. And I think we will look back on this as a moment in time that we will have obviously had to put a lot of energy into as to how we rethink it, but it'll come out in a much better, I would say, connected way for our people and for really all of our clients.
I am going to pick your brains more in terms of what that reimagining of offices and workplace looks like, especially from both of you as business leaders. But what is one of the things that we were discussing on one of our prep discussions was around hospitality and tourism and that side of the sector. And one of the questions that I'd like to ask both of you is, where do you see the recovery coming from on those sides? Do you see it starting in 2021 or 2022? What are some of the thoughts and some of the clients that you're talking to, planning for Canadian hospitality?
Yeah, I can start again on this one. So for the activity is picking up in that business in terms of investors in the market starting to transact again. Obviously last year, just with so much uncertainty in the market and with full stoppage with an unclear future of when that stoppage would happen, that's a killer for transactions. And so there's just a lot of on the sidelines. But the activity certainly has picked up in terms of interest, and that's from an investor standpoint. So they're seeing that there will be a future for this. Obviously, there's some conversions that are happening. From hospitality hotels to residential, as an example. But from a macro perspective, if I look at it just from a trend, I do see a slower recovery in this than other sectors. I think people are going to be very excited to finally travel again. If you think about it, though, just where we're at in Canada on that spectrum, we're a little bit slower in terms of when that tap will turn back on in terms of this year. So we may see that spike start to accelerate in 22 as opposed to 21 in terms of when rooms are going to be filled, so to speak. Look at historical events like whether it was 9/11 or other things that put a real stop to travel. It took several years to climb back to the same level. I'm a little cynical on where I think business travel will land. I'm not one of the people that says, oh, we've now reimagined and everybody. I do think in a couple of years it'll creep back to where it probably was before, because business travel in our business, some of it's essential to see properties and see people, but some of it, and I'm not saying this is what I do, but this is an industry. It's part of what people do. And you almost can't work that out of the system, and it's going to become a cost of doing business. Well, they're doing it. Next thing you know, you're doing it. And so I think business travel is going to go back, but that's going to be slower in the next year as there's more uncertainty for sure. And I'm not a hospitality expert, so I'm not going to prognosticate too much there. But that's at least from the clients we're speaking to in the industry that we're talking about the progression over the next year.
Yeah, I would add to that. Jen and Brian, that for me, when I look at the sector, I sort of look at it, urban, your business hotels, and then your recreational properties, and so I think there is somewhat of a different story to tell depending on what type of asset in that asset class you're looking at. But we have a number of mandates that are live in the market right now, and we're seeing good interest. I do think it's still value driven, and it's not yet at sort of one of the asset classes that is going to see cap rate compression in the short term. But I do think that as we get into the back end of this year, you're going to start to see RevPAR start to solidify, and that is really going to then allow 2022 to be quite a really interesting part of the it's going to be an interesting asset class to watch. The other piece I'm looking at, just on business travel, I agree with Brian. I do think business travel will recover. But what have we learned in COVID? What I've learned is, you need to, in some areas, slow down and take in what's around you. And in other areas, you need to speed up, right? So for me, and as I start to think of business travel for our organization, it may be now no longer just a in and out, 24-hour trip. It may be 3 days. And you may want to get a little deeper, in what you're doing, what the purpose is, and so I'm starting to look at it through that lens, which will obviously change the revenue profile or just what the offering might look like, for city hotels and others. So, for that's kind of what it's been on my mind.
Maybe staying on the investment side of things, and in terms of areas that we are seeing quite a bit of acceleration and improvement, and Werner, and talking to Tony from your team over the last couple of hours, is we are seeing an increase in terms of the amount of demand and the number of parties coming for investment properties really across Canada. What is driving that? And I was going to say who's driving it, but it's probably even just as fair to say who isn't necessarily at the table right now. But where is that demand coming from for investment? Which product classes are they looking at the most?
Well, let me start with the capital before we get into the asset classes. So, from our viewpoint and mine, last year was really dominant on private capital. That drove the activity. And so whether it's high net worth or some of the value add funds and opportunity funds that are out there, they drove activity. And so as we now get into 2021, we're starting to see more institutional money looking at opportunities on a longer term basis as some of the asset classes start to stabilize that were potentially not stable last year. So the obvious ones, and this is I'm not telling anyone at NAIOP anything they don't know. Industrial, super strong, and will continue to run, and massive cap rate compression. Multifamily, for the most part, the same. The rent control discussion that has been going on in many provinces and municipalities continues to sort of, sit out there. But generally speaking, the sector is strong. And back to your introduction, if we are going to get to 400,000 new immigrants per year, and start rolling that sector, will play really, really well downstream. And I'm a big believer that Canada needs to be at least 50 million people to really compete. If you start thinking downstream a little bit, and so we have a long way to go from 39 million. So I like that sector. And now we're starting to see office start to play a little bit, and people start to understand what the return might look like. And the other piece that we're looking at, of course, is there's a hunger for yield out there. Is whether you want to call them alternatives or otherwise, but data centers and life science, self-storage, anything like that that was potentially in another bucket has all become a little bit more mainstream now. So I think there's going to be lots of capital to continue to play, and I think there's going to be some new asset classes that will emerge with some strength and some new capital being put into them.
Yeah, I echo that. Bed, sheds, and redevs. That's what we've been joking when we talk, and that's really that's driving it. And the what Werner was saying is I agree with. It's a lot of institutional or well-funded, sophisticated buyers in the marketplace, and there's a lack of product in which is driving some of the spikes or the drops in cap rates that we're seeing in some of the prices per acre on the industrial side. Again, none of this stuff is it's been written about a lot in the papers about just the lack of supply, whether it's on residential side or the industrial side, with all the warehouse space coming in. And we talked earlier about the logistics, and we just talked about when immigration starts kicking in. We could spend the next hour or day or month talking about the slowness to get buildings built due to all the hurdles to get over. So I'll walk away from that one until you're ready. But it's constraining supply in the marketplace, obviously, and that's going to continue to drive a hunt for product, and that's certainly not going to drive down prices anytime soon on some of these quality assets in particular.
You certainly can keep talking about the housing market, although I know it's a sore point for all of us in terms of how to get product there faster. But one of the things that Werner said, Brian, and to your position, and I don't know if everyone knows your background in coming from experience working both sides of the border and being in different industries like Iron Mountain, as well as working with Maricon Associates and Yvonne Products. But one of the things that Werner said was 50 million people to be competitive on a global landscape. How does Canada, and really arguably both of you could answer this, but how is Canada positioned in terms of new investment coming in terms of new employers coming into the market? How are we viewed right now and moving into the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question, and I think in some regards, Canada still isn't getting the attention. Capital. There's a lot more international capital that could be coming in to the marketplace, and I think it's starting that journey, but it's still been a very local. I mean, only in the last, our first transition was to getting more institutional capital involved in it, and then the second journey is getting more of that international capital. And so it's viewed as it's an attractive investment. It's expensive to get in because of everything we've just been talking about. But in terms of quality of living, access to great talent, it's an example where Canada is leading and is the tech industry. And spoken with a bunch of clients that have bases in the U.S. and they said they can't wait for some of these restrictions on cross-border to happen to be lifted, because they have tech companies just eager to get up to Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver, and it's got a great skilled workforce. And one of the good things that's been happening with our immigration is we've been bringing in skilled labor too. So the ability to continue to build that population, that's attractive to employers. What we struggle with versus the U.S. is we don't really have secondary cities. So it's both attractive where we have these wonderful infrastructure set up in the GTA and Metro Vancouver, et cetera. But the US, you drive 2 hours and you're another million population city. So you can have access to different talent. You can you know, the cost to acquire an office building. Here, if you go out to a secondary location, the infrastructure is just not there yet to support it. To continue to invest in transit and some of the other things that will enable us to have more sprawl. Do we really want more sprawl? We kind of do. I think if we're going to really get to 50 million, we can't just pop everyone into the major cities. I think we're going to have to build up some more secondary cities, which will make more availability to office and affordable housing, et cetera. So it's still an attractive destination. And being a US, I mean, I moved here and I left for 2 more years, but I came back. So I really, you know, N of 1.
You liked it.
But positive, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was married to a Canadian, so I guess maybe that has a little bit to do with it.
There you go. I mean, I think that secondary city piece is an opportunity, a huge opportunity. And I think that the one area that we still play down a level is on mass transit and that infrastructure that Brian speaks to. And so we have to still think about that. And just there's a massive cost, right, to start to get trains and other ways to mass move people into those secondary markets. But there's a huge opportunity there. I'd say just to add to Brian's point on your question, Canada is a great country to invest in, and our major cities are coveted. The challenge is for many international investors is that our asset base is too small. Like they want to come in and they want to make a big bet, and they can't get at it, right? So therein lies part of the problem, right? With some of that international capital that will sort of park offshore until they're ready to come into harbor. But it's, for me, it's that as we grow and get to that aspirational goal, and I'm just throwing 50 million out. I've read books on 100 million, but I can't see how Canada gets to 100 million people in the near term. But if we throw that aspirational goal out there, and people, and we're all obviously in the commercial real estate industry, that just drives our industry forward, and it's a massive opportunity for us going forward for the next decade.
It's easy to base a lot of this discussion right now on all of the tailwinds and the reasons to be opportunistic and optimistic. What are some of the challenges that you see, maybe even more in the short term of the next 12 months, as we do start to emerge out of lockdowns and opening up of business and sort of that repositioning of a lot of assets? Where are some of the bigger challenges that you're seeing for our industry or for some of the asset classes?
Werner, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Yeah, industry and asset class. Let's separate them. So, as an industry, I think, permitting continues to be a challenge, and the timeline it takes to turn things around in all of our major cities. And I'm not just cherry picking one versus the other. I think the audience on this group, we have, a heavy weighting to Western Canada, and so you all know what we're talking about. So I think that the permitting piece is a concern for me, and bureaucracy is an absolute barrier and obstacle for any country to grow. That's the first piece. And I'd say the other obstacle, we have, from an industry perspective, is just attracting talent. And we talked a little about this on our pre-calls. And I think that, we do as an industry need to continue to do a better job. And this is all of us, right? If I'm standing in a room, I'm pointing at all of you, to elevate our industry, not our companies or what we do, or whether we're a developer or a consultant or an advisor, but just our industry to grab it and raise it up a level and attract, better and deeper talent to it. Because, the FIs tend to get a lot of attraction from top talent, and they tend to go one direction. We need to try to, as an industry, if I'm thinking downstream, just do a better job of curating talent.
I couldn't agree more. I'll just sort of big check mark on the supply. Talked about that before, and the development timelines. Double clicking on talent too. I agree. I mean, particularly as we look at tech as a comparator, it's a big driver of talent. People coming out of university, they want to be in the tech business. Why? It's interesting, it's exciting, it's relevant, and there's wealth potential if you do a startup. Real estate has a lot of entrepreneurial qualities to it. That's what attracts a lot of our most successful Canadians, full stop, have been on the backs of being entrepreneurs in real estate. And the brightest that want to come in and be entrepreneurial and drive growth in commercial real estate and be creative and build the cities of the future and build the offices of the future and transform real estate to where it needs to go. It's been a wonderful yielding industry with, you build a 30-year asset. Sometimes that breeds conservatism. But how do we continue to drive innovation, and not just from a prop tech perspective, but just innovation in how we rethink this? So I think talent, for me, getting the best and the brightest, is so critical, that we build that ecosystem that is critical for commercial real estate talent. The other headwind I would say to it is just what we don't know what's going to happen in the next year post pandemic, right? It's great right now for a lot of the economy, not all of it. It's an imbalanced recovery, right? A lot of service industry are getting really hit hard, but for a lot of other industries, it's doing well right now, and there's a lot of growth. What happens in a year? Is it so supercharged that it creates inflationary pressure? Do we have a looming debt problem, or are we undersupplied? And so therefore, we're not at capacity yet. We're going to grow our way out of it. You look back on some of the other recession-based downturns, and we were able to grow our way out of it. We had big growth recovering from a big decline in output, so it was healthy. And so you listen to different economists, and I think you listen to Benjamin Tal, and you feel good about yourself, and you have a beer. You have to put on a sad movie. So I don't know where it'll go. So I don't want to be the put a damper here on it, but that is something that concerns all of us right now, is what does a year from now look like for the macro environment?
I think it's super. You pumped up Benjamin Tal, and then you lost your audio for 1 second when you said who the pessimist was.
Rosenberg.
It's true. One piece I would add to that, and it's all tied together to what we're talking about, is when you think of retail transformation, that's going to take some time. And there will be some areas and some pockets of our cities, specifically I'm thinking street front retail, right? Where right now you go into this, into an average block, and there's 3 dry cleaners, a juice person, and a pizza. And you're sort of like, okay, long term, is that what we need, going forward? So that will create, they will likely turn over, they will leave, they'll need to be reimagined. The permitting piece then comes in, the mixed use discussion. How long does that take? And do these owners have, the capital or the patience to kind of hang out that long, right? So there's either a massive opportunity there, or there's risk, right? Depending on which side of the table you're sitting on and looking at it. But those areas will be better curated. And I think, again, back to the learning in COVID, what do we learn? We want to be able to walk out somewhere in our neighborhood if you live urban, and have those conveniences at your table, right, at your fingertips. A grocer, a butcher, a baker, something that makes your community special, right? Because I don't think we're going to walk away from our communities like we did before and just like always be on the road and always travel. I think people will start to want to spend a bit more downtime, in and around their home. They will travel first, but then that'll just be a little bit more of what might make us up going forward day to day.
Yeah, I agree. The transformation that everybody wants to have, that's a big risk, is how quickly we can make it happen. We talk about the logistics angle, urban supply chain, last mile delivery. The existing setup doesn't make it work, right? You can't just make it either affordable to build. I mean, building a supply chain in an area that would have a much higher rent profile doesn't necessarily make the dollars and cents work. So how does this happen in a way that actually can be profitable for the business, for the owner of the buildings, et cetera? It's going to take a lot of reimagining. going back to the talent, we need the people in there, and going back to the development timelines and how the bureaucracy that Werner talked about, all this has to work together. If we just go as status quo, transformation won't happen because it will just take too long, and it's got to be quick. Things have to move. I mean, look at Sidewalk Labs. Maybe that was never going to work, but it feels like that was death by a million bureaucratic cuts. And that was a big, bold vision, right?
Mm-hmm. We have talked about people a couple of times, and I've been steering away from it, but now I would love to pick your brains. Both of you are major employers in Canada. Both of you have really young workforces that are diversified pretty much to every major and secondary market in the country. And I'd love to know more about how you've navigated through the last 18 months, but I think this call would love to know what comes next. And so the one topic we haven't talked that much about is the office space, and what does the office look like as we start to open up. So I'm going to leave that as a very open-ended question. One, in terms of just from you listening to lots of different clients, what are you hearing? What is everyone thinking about? And then I'm going to start to pick your brain a bit more in terms of what Colliers and CB are thinking of.
Okay.
Want me to kick that off?
Sure, I can go. You can go either one.
So, as I said, a few minutes ago, I'm a big believer in the office. I do think it has a massive future, for us as businesses and as an asset class. I do think we're going to use it differently, and it is still being imagined as we speak. I think like what the new model looks like, and you tell me. I've heard 2-3, 3-2. I'm gonna move around. I'm gonna do this. There's all sorts of models that are being worked through right now by our clients and major employers for the like, and it's really going to come down to right back to the talent conversation, right? Which is what does the future look like, for the best and the brightest, and how do they want to operate? And how do you find a way to balance that with how the company wants to foster collaboration and idea generation and teaming, and like keep going down the list, right, of all those sort of pieces. And there is an output that comes with that, but I don't think the model's yet built. It's not like it's just all in Excel and it's just gonna spit it out quite yet. I think it's still a work in progress. But I'm a big believer in it, and I think it will move forward. I do think flex and agile is an important part of our future, and as companies start to look at their long-term lease commitments, I think that every office owner should be looking at agile, an agile component to their building in some shape or form. It just makes sense. But do you need to have 15 different providers to do that? Do you want to do that on your own? Do you want to do that through a white, label service? There's all sorts of business opportunities that will exist, but I do think flexibility inside of a stack, is going to be important. And in suburban office, I think you have a different angle on it. You may just want to own your own domain, and so there may be a little bit of a shift of ownership, from institutional capital or private capital to the end user. And so I am watching that a little bit to see how people want to control their destinies, because then you can kind of do what you want with the air handling and all the other components that might make you feel more comfortable to run your people. So there was a second part of your question, but we'll get to that, I think, as we go forward. Ryan?
So I wish I could add more controversy by saying I fundamentally disagree with. We keep agreeing on a lot of things. But look, I'm in the same stance. I feel the office is just a part of, especially in our industry, it's just a critical part of it. It's a gathering place. It's a central point that enables people to collaborate, have a sense of place, a sense of belonging, to foster innovation. And it's not just our industry. I think it's particularly acute in our industry for many roles. Not every role. Roles are different. Business lines are different. But for a lot of the roles, particularly brokerage is a good example. The appraisal business, you need to just be together and collaborate and work through things. I think a lot of our clients are still they don't know yet. So one of the things, you mentioned a petri dish. The U.S. is a great petri dish. They're going to try 75 different varieties of this, and we're going to learn a little bit by watching them, I think. But a lot of them, and we surveyed them recently, and I think 2/3 of the people we surveyed said we're thinking about it. We know flexible and agile is going to be a part of it. We just don't know what we're. A lot of tenants are still unsure, and that's being reflected that there's still just not a there's still a lot of deferring and decisions and pushing out shorter term leases because people are, that's reflecting the uncertainty of what's next. I think to what Werner was saying, there's a lot more, and we're in that group too, that are starting to say office is important. We understand there's going to be flexibility. We have to figure out where that flexibility fits based on your business reality and your role. And we're going to design something and then be agile and adjust based on what we learn. If we just said this is our 10-year strategy, it'd be silly. But if we went in there and said, yeah, we're going to be a little bit more agile in this approach, learn, and maybe 6 months from now, we're going to change. And communicating with people to say, we got to be a little bit more flexible than we have been in the past to do that, and experiment with some technology, some formats. That's one thing I've put a lot of emphasis for those going into new is how can we design a space that has a little bit more of a modular feel to it. And so it is it's hard because a lot of people don't have that freedom and the CapEx and the ability to do that. But those who can are definitely looking into that because they want to be able to shift if in 2 years this model doesn't work. I mean, because we've seen this in the past, right? Things go like this. Everybody work from home, Yahoo, everybody go home. Now everybody come back. IBM, everybody go home, everybody come back. And it wasn't because of technology. It was because of collaboration and interaction. So
yeah, and yeah. I just add to that specifically, so there are in a number of our major cities, some subleases that are out in the market right now, fully built out. They're seeing multiple offers on them. And so the sublessor in that case is kind of going, okay, maybe hold on a second, maybe I might need that floor or two, right? So you're starting to see now the early signs, of large corporate starting to lean in a little bit more. I'd say the tech, clients and biotech have been first to market in many cases during COVID, and because they see how this is going to play, going forward. But when you start to look at built out sublease space, with furniture ready to go at a slight discount and get multiple offers on it, there's a little read there, right? Now the trading volume hasn't returned on the leasing side to what it was, but there is activity. And even in the lockdown cities of Montreal and Toronto, the virtual activity that's going, is decent given the lockdown. Vancouver playing much better, more people out looking, but still not to where we were because of what Brian's saying, which is their companies are just not there yet. Nobody necessarily wants to be the leader to go out and say, okay, I'm making a commitment, we're all back and let's go. We saw that with a few banks in the US that said everybody back in on January, and a week later they said, sorry, no, we're just going to hold on that because they got a lot of pushback. So you got to find that balance. And from the corporate side of it, many of the companies out there just aren't ready. They're taking their time on this one.
The analogy I used is that we're at my science background, we're an experiment with no variable in control. It's all variable. So you have the predominant amount of people that are off-site right now and remote. So it's making it works. It's not great, but it works. And you feel the productivity is maybe not as much of a delta until we get in an environment where it's more reflecting of normal, whether normal starts out at 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, there will be more people in the office than not. And then you can start seeing, well, an increase in remote working or flexibility. How does that play out for your company? And I think we haven't seen that yet. So we can't really, that's why a lot of companies are unwilling to put down their foot and say, we don't know how this is going to play out because this is not a real true test. We're in a fake environment right now where it can work because the ecosystem's all remote versus a mixed ecosystem.
I think it's arguably probably one of the biggest topics that's on anyone's mind that's either managing people or operations or organizations is just,
and no one has an opinion on it either, which is good.
No, it's hard to find an opinion on it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck me from other conversations I've had with each of you is not just around that talent pool and how we're managing the teams today, but how we develop real estate professionals moving forward. And it seems that it's something that both of you are spending a lot of time focused on in terms of how we're creating more diversity in terms of thought and experience. And Brian, you're a great example of it, of how we become more and more of maybe a broader talent pool for the industry. So what are some of the things that you all are focused on for the next couple of years as we do continue to grow, to change or develop that talent pool outside of just getting people back in the office to collaborate? Werner?
Sure.
Want me to start? Okay, sure. It's a frustration of mine personally, and I think that number one, there is not enough funding for true real estate programs across our Canadian universities, and I'm on one of the advisory boards for one in Ontario, and I have to tell you, it's difficult to raise money for the program, and that's partly because the industry is small and the program is small and it hasn't yet hit that next level of cachet. And so back to what we were talking about earlier, we need as an industry, we need to crank that up a notch, right? That's number one. Get some university programs that are really well funded with the best professors that people want to be, driving, to as they're coming out of high school. The second piece is, it's no secret from a diversity and inclusion perspective. We need as an industry to be more diverse. And we need to go and look for talent in different areas that may be sitting in other industries and drag them into what's an amazing industry. Brian talked about the entrepreneurial piece of this, which is just near and dear to all of our hearts that are in real estate. It doesn't matter where you are, kind of on the stack. So I think to me, it's like we got to get some funding into it, and we have to do a better job of promoting it. And it's, when you think of the total GDP that comes out of our sector, it's massive, but we play down. We tend to be, maybe it's a Canadian thing, but we're just way too humble and as an industry, and not like out there trying to really push it. Whereas the iBanks are just trying to get all the university programs structured around creating talent for their businesses going forward. And kudos to them. They saw that, and they captured that opportunity and they pushed it forward. So,
yeah, no, I agree. I think expanding the talent pool is the way I always talk about it. And that comes in different ways. One is a university approach. I agree what Werner said, but also just accessing talent that we hadn't accessed before. So that can come from a diversity of cultural backgrounds, race, gender, as well as business experience. And real estate is a very relationship. It has a big family bent to it. It has a big legacy bent to it. Those are all, on their own, they're not bad or good. They just are. But it is a more limited talent pool often. So how do we broaden that talent pool? And that will take purposeful fit to go to where the talent is, and you have to make it demystify what real estate is and break down the barriers and make it attractive. You can succeed in this business. You don't have to have a name. You don't have to have been in real estate, or your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother been in real estate, which is a lot of successful people have a lineage in real estate. And I would say probably a higher percentage maybe than in some other industries, because of the generational transfer and wealth and assets, et cetera. But how do we diversify out and say you can actually be successful and grow? I mean, I've been part of multiple industries in my career, and you recruit in from a lot of different things, and you can learn a business. It's not easy, but you can learn a business and gain relationships and be successful. So we have to demystify that. So I think what Werner was saying is making it accessible to people, broadcasting it. That's a big part of it, but being very purposeful and strategic about how we do it. Because if we just go to the same places every single time, we'll still have good talent, but we won't be broadening that talent base.
One of the other things that you both spoke passionately about, Werner, you certainly did, is not just our need to expand the talent pool, but also the impact that the industry can have on community. Are there things that CB or Colliers are doing over the next couple of years to really expand how you impact your communities? And your communities literally are every market across the country. But are there things that you would be doing differently, especially coming out of COVID and understanding the importance of supporting, whether it's housing or otherwise? But what are both of your organizations doing to sort of refocus or calibrate on community?
Yeah, I can take this one to start if
Go
you
ahead.
want. So we, we just launched our first impact report this year from an ESG perspective, environment, social governance, right? And for us, it is about, we're a very decentralized entrepreneurial type of place globally, not just in Canada. So we have a lot of efforts going on in every single marketplace, in every area, and we empower our local people to do that. And it's about how do we now bring more horsepower behind that and standardize and not standardize, create more of a tailwind behind what we do and unify under a few umbrellas to make more maximum input. We're hearing our clients talk about that. So there's a business imperative, but just as you said, the community imperative. I mean, last year, as an example, food insecurity was a real big deal. So we organized around that and created a campaign to all across all our businesses focus more on food banks and raising money and raising collecting food. So I think there's so much that can be done in that space about engaging with the community. It is inherently, I think, a local activity. I think, but there's power in the size of the companies that we manage, that we can unify several thousand people behind something. It can drive more value than the independent efforts, and that's how we're focused. Organize what's already a large but decentralized effort.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely the success is at the grassroots level, Jen, and so I agree with Brian. Again, not in many areas we are disagreeing yet, but I think for me it's you can do both, right? You can lean in behind some national causes that can impact your the communities nationally, but really driving at the grassroots level is critical, and getting people to really think in that way, right? Is that they, real estate by its nature is successful when the community around it is successful. So whatever you can do to make it, better in any small way, whether that's homelessness or shelter or food banks, as Brian's speaking to, or it's affordable housing, or it's, access to childcare. Like there's all sorts of areas that you can get involved, but it has to be ingrained at the grassroots level, meaning at every local office. And so for us, that's sort of a very similar strategy, except we also do lean in nationally to try to find some causes that we think have purpose and meaning for the industry that we're in. And it's, again, as you said, our business is in almost every community across the country, and so it's no easy task, but I do think we're all are trying to do our best to make a difference.
The affordable housing one that Werner brings up, that's a big one that it dovetails well with business requirements, right? So we're always talking about how we want to find ways to speed up the cycle for development and getting more product out there, and that's going to have a beneficial effect. One thinks, if you look at your supply demand curves, that it will help with some of the affordable housing challenges, but it also will create more supply in the marketplace. So there's definitely, it doesn't have to be a misaligned objective where the business reality is separate from one of our core values is do what's right. Do what's right for the community, do what's right for our clients, do what's right for our people. So you can do that and still make money and have it aligned, so it's not looking like you're profiteering or that you're going, charitable only. So I think where those things align, there's a great synergy, and that will even drive more value.
No, I mean, no debate at all. The economic growth and housing go hand in hand in terms of being able to manage it. And when they don't, we gain more challenges. both as society and as an industry. We are coming up to the top of the hour, and we've promised to get everyone out and back to their next Zoom call on time. I can't say how much I look forward to the day that we get to do this all in the same room as opposed to the same channel. But one, thank you so much for your time. I can't get over that we can just throw and pepper questions on about everything from both running businesses to overseeing the industry across the country, and get such phenomenal answers from you. All of these topics could have easily been a full hour if we wanted to dissect them. But my last question for both of you is just, as you look forward over the next year and a half, what would be sort of your biggest prediction in terms of where you see something going or what we have to watch out for? So it either can be a prediction or sort of a piece of advice and caution as to what to watch for as we recover and maybe see in person next year at this talk.
Well, I'll give you a billboard statement. Don't forget what we learned. Don't forget what we learned. Because there's a tremendous amount of learning that we've all had in the last 15 months. And that's in the business level, it's at the personal level, at the family level, the community level, that you can apply it universally. But my one concern, as I look forward, is that we just go back to what was. And I think we've learned that there is, we're at this moment in time, which is very unique, because this was a global, crisis and pandemic. And as Brian, mentioned before, it's an imbalanced recovery. And so, with that, some areas may be accelerating faster, but let's not forget what we learned at every level. That to me is core to the future.
Yeah. If I had to give a billboard, is we will forget what we've learned, is my cynical viewpoint. No, I share Werner's standpoint. I mean, there's a lot that we have to come out of it. I think my prediction, the thing to look out for over the next year is, what is getting in the way of change, I guess. And I think, can we, is this a prediction and more of a question, I guess? Can we get out of our own way and grow? And I think, I guess it's more of a question. And I hope the answer is yes. I hope we can make progress in some of these things that will enable us to continue the growth. We won't continue to have supply constraint, but I do. So that's, I guess I'll do one. I'll do the question is, can we get out of our own way? My prediction is I'll call back to something Werner said earlier. I see the alternatives as starting to take a bigger foothold in the country. More so, I think there's a real ample opportunity, especially with nearshoring, whether it's in the data center, life sciences. I think this pandemic has taught us that one thing we have learned is that we don't have a life sciences infrastructure nearly where it needs to be. We have to start building that up. And then also on the data center side, bits and bytes, it's only going to get more and more and more and more and more. So we need the infrastructure for that in Canada. So I do feel those alternatives, and that's just two alternatives. Obviously, self-storage, we're under the US by a lot, healthcare, et cetera. But I see the alternatives as taking a larger foothold in Canada. So that's my minor prediction along with the bigger question.
Thank you very, very much to both of you for your time and for your perspective. I think ending it with two challenges, it sounds from both of you. One, that we can't forget what we've learned, and two, that we need to do more to set our future and our path for the future in terms of really preparing for it and trying to accelerate it. So thank you very much to NAIOP for putting this panel together, to Werner and Brian, to you for spending this time. And I think with that, we're right at the hour. So we will say until next time.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for moderating. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun.